I'd like to welcome you to this evening's public lecture and awards ceremony, which is part of the 22nd annual John K. Friesen conference, which we're holding over the today and tomorrow. How many in the audience attended today's session? Yeah, how many? So it's a long day. How many people have just come for the public session this evening? So a bit half and half. Okay. Well, welcome to all those who are new here this evening, and to everybody else. Thank you for staying around. This evening's session is a public lecture. We're going to have a keynote address from Lynn MacDonald, who's going to be talking about rethinking elder abuse in Canada and why it matters. After the keynote address, we're going to have a presentation of the 2013 SFU Elder Abuse Awareness to Action Awards, and then after that, we would like to invite you to a reception. Okay, I shall say a few words about Lynn. Lynn is a professor at the Faculty of Social Work and is director of the Institute of Life Course in Aging at the University of Toronto. She is a scientific director of the Knowledge Initiative for the Care of the Elderly, an international knowledge transfer network. In 2002, she was awarded the Governor-General's Golden Jubilee Medal for her contributions to Canadian gerontology. In 2007, she was awarded the Betty Havens Award in Longitudinal Research by the Canadian Association of Gerontology. Her research interests include work and retirement, knowledge mobilization, violence against women and older adults, poverty and homelessness. She's been board director of the Alberta and Canadian Associations of Gerontology and served as editor, policy and practice and acting editor for social sciences for the Canadian Journal on Aging. She's also been board director of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada. Lynn is a world expert in the area of elder abuse. And I hope you will find her words of wisdom very interesting and stimulating. We have about an hour and 15 for Lynn to talk, but I do not believe that she's going to talk for that amount of time. But we do have time for questions and answers.
Yeah, we can talk.
Which would be great. Okay, thank you very much, Lynn.
Thank you. I'm sorry to be here yet again, but so are you. So, what I wanted to talk about today is something that's so obvious it hurts, but it took me like 30 years to figure this out. And I think that, for example, Gloria and Charmaine can probably give me a bit of a hand here with what I'm going to do. But part of why I'm doing what I'm doing is because what I've been doing for 30 years hasn't been working very well. And I think we need to change our approach to elder abuse. I could be wrong, of course, but I do think we really need to start thinking very differently about what we do. So where I want to start is I picked up a book on social work, which I didn't pick it up. I was forced to read it. I had to review the book for a journal, and it was called Citizenship Social Work. And I thought, oh boy. Anyway, I read the book and I thought, yes, this is the answer. This book is amazing. So what I want to talk about is how through elder abuse, we do not treat older adults as full citizens of Canada. And I think that the major part of that problem that we are facing has to do with ageism in Canada, which is way worse than I had ever imagined. And in fact, it's shaming to know how bad it was. And I'm going to talk about a very recent research project done in Canada on the degree of ageism that all of us are basically perpetrating. As a result of this ageism, I think it has really affected the way that we look at, elder mistreatment. And for me, elder mistreatment includes elder abuse and neglect. And normally, the word is used a lot in Britain, and it covers both abuse and neglect. What I then want to say is that the treatment that we are offering older people and how we treat them is quite insidious, and it's quite silent. And that we basically need a new model to look at the whole issue of how people are mistreated. So if you don't agree, just interrupt, it's no problem. I think, as everybody here knows, there are at least 3 types of ageism out there. There's individual ageism, which has to do with ideas, attitudes, beliefs, and practices that are biased against a certain group of people simply because of their age. We also know that organizations are most definitely ageist in terms of their missions, in terms of the rules that they hold, and in terms of the practices that they use. Again, it is only based on somebody's age. Government policies and practices are also well known to be biased against older people, and I can think of all kinds of them. Ageism, as most of you know, can be intentional or unintentional. Excuse me, I have a cold. But what we need to think about is that ageism is way more complex than we think about. We all think we know about ageism. Everybody who works in the field of gerontology or geriatric medicine or gerontological nursing says to themselves, of course I'm not ageist, not at all. But anyway, at the end, there's a questionnaire for you to do, and you can figure out just how ageist you might really be or not be. I want to talk about the Rivera report. Rivera is a chain of nursing homes across Canada, some in the United States, a very powerful chain and a very rich chain. They have partnered with the International Federation on Aging, and they do very brief, I think they don't do the research, they pay for research to be done on subjects that they think are close to the heart of Canadians. So the most recent study that they just released was done in it wasn't actually done in 2012, it was released in 2013, so I'm sorry I said that. But if you start to look at the figures of this research, the degree of ageism in our country is quite stunning. The research was done on 1,500 people. Supposedly, it was a sort of random sample, and it did all ages from 18 years and up. So what they found was that over half of Canadians say ageism is the most tolerated social prejudice when we compare it to every other type of prejudice in this country. 51% of Canadians believe that. This is an interesting figure for me because I say to myself, you know what? I'm not going to become a black person tomorrow. I'm not going to become a Chinese person tomorrow. I'm not going to probably become gay tomorrow. I'm not going to change. I'm going to become old. It's not like saying, when I become black, this is going to happen, I'll be discriminated against. Ageism affects all of us. And for some unknown reason, we don't look at our future that we're planning for ourselves, that this is going to come back to roost on us. We're all vulnerable to this. Every single person in this room. If you're lucky, of course, you may get hit by a moose on the way home, but you have to be careful. Why are we prejudiced against older people when we ourselves are growing old every day? A question I can never answer. 63% of older people say they have been treated unfairly because of their age. 63% of older people in this country. I will tell you that 46% of older people say this within 29 European nations in a survey that was done in 2009 in Europe. So we're higher than Europe, although it's hard to compare given the bad research. 8 in 10 older persons over age 75 are seen as less important and more often ignored by younger generations. 7 in 10, or 71%, say Canada values younger generations more than older generations. And if you're a fundraiser, try to raise money, try to keep your doors open, you know that's true. So 1 in 5, or 21% of Canadians, see older adults as a burden on society. 21%. If we look at the source of ageism, they try to determine the source of ageism. Younger people are the biggest source of ageism, 56%. The really disturbing figure is the healthcare system and healthcare professionals. That is a fairly large number of 34%. Are a source of ageism for older people in our country. The workplace isn't quite as bad as I would have thought it was, and I think the government has a fairly large slice of ageism itself, if you take a look there. And I mean, even if you look at, I just off the top of my head, if you think of the new immigration policies, where basically they've changed the point system. So a person coming to Canada starts to get less and less points from 39 years of age and over. As they progress to age 50, they get absolutely no points. So after age 50, there's no points for you because older people aren't economically viable and we don't need them in this country. And that's exactly what the government has said. The forms of ageism that older adults said that they experienced, one of the biggest ones was just totally being ignored, and that was about 41%. The assumption that people who are older have nothing to contribute is a very common one, I think, that most of us are familiar with. The fact that we assume that most older people are incompetent is a rather serious issue. Being treated like a child, you know, like you've been in the field for 25 years and you say to yourself, we still treat older people like children. And I heard some of that this morning in some of the conversation. The other thing that's probably really become a big issue for Canadians is 16% think most older people have lost a good chunk of their memory. I would say that the Alzheimer's Society of Canada has done a magnificent campaign with the rising tide and the use of figures to convince us all that we're going to lose it very shortly. But if you stop, it's the most effective campaign to ever study in the field of aging. But the truth of the matter is, really, 7 to 8% of people have dementia. What they report are actual numbers that always look really scary. So I think even this one, excuse me, about losing your memory. I mean, whenever I say something, my kids say, ooh, nursing home. And, you know, like it may be a bit of a joke, but I'm not so sure all the time if it is. Now, this one's important, really important. Think of clinics, think of hospitals, think of nursing homes, and look at the degree of people in these settings who dismissed older people's complaints as an inevitable part of aging. That is bad health care. I think this is worth thinking about. The rest of it is not so bad. If we take a look at what older people actually think about aging in this country, how they perceive it, 89% of our Canadians associate aging with something very negative, like not being able to get around, losing your independence, being alone. I didn't put all of them in, becoming senile, and so on. Aging has an overwhelming negative view in this country. And it's worse. I don't know. To me, maybe I'm crazy. Maybe you could tell me. I find this way worse than I would ever expect it. I thought Canadians were better. You know, like we're Canadians, right? But we're not. We're not doing well. The other really interesting thing is it's the Gen Y, which is up to about the 1980s, and Gen X, which is from the 1980s on to 2000, are the most likely of all Canadians to hold negative perceptions of aging. And that should tell us something about, right out of the gate, where we should be targeting younger people around the whole notion of aging and aging as part of life. But there's only a few little programs out there that really do that. They also view people over age 75 as really in bad shape. A third of them describe people over age 75 as dependent, sick, and frail. We have a problem. What? Tell me. Talk to me.
She's worried.
Well, you know, I'm worried too. I mean, are these my kids?
I'll be 75 next year. This is scary.
Well, you know, I think it tells us what we need to do.
Yeah.
I think, you know, like part of the field of aging has had very bad research. I dare say that on your film, but it has. It's had appalling research. You know, it's been people like me. I used to be a social worker, kind-hearted, do the right thing out there. I didn't have a clue. I had no clue of what I was doing or why I was doing it other than I cared. And in the last 20 years, we've gotten way better research. This is more research that can help us. It can help us move forward. So maybe you want to hear about this new one. They have discovered I have just found a brand new research project, which was finally just written up for the first time. Just came out in June. It's not even June yet, but it came out in June 2013. And this article talks about the descriptive versus the prescriptive form of ageism. And the descriptive form of ageism is the one that I was just talking about. The prescriptive form of ageism is extremely interesting. What these people have found in 6 really well-run experiments is that younger people are telling us what the stereotypes should be when you are older. What does an older person do? What is the stereotype for being older? That is prescriptive. They're prescribing what we should be doing. If we do not follow what they have prescribed for us to do, we get punished. And in this experiment, how you got punished was you weren't considered to be a warm, cozy, nice older person, but you were viewed as an incompetent person. And that was your punishment, and you were treated that way. The areas that they looked at were kind of interesting, just so you know. They looked at the whole area of succession. And older people were supposed to, as a stereotype, were supposed to quit their jobs, step down, let the younger person move up the hierarchy in the organization, and make sure they gave them their wealth. Which I think about my kids, and I go, ha. Anyway, not that I have a lot of wealth, but that was the first domain, which they called succession. The second domain was the domain of shared resources. And if an older person overused healthcare, social services, again, they were punished as people that were misusing and were not entitled to, healthcare or social services. And I'm trying to remember what the last one was. Oh, yes. The last one is very interesting. They call it crossover. So if you cross over from being young, or from being old and pretending you're young and acting young, younger people can see through that immediately. And you know what? They don't like that They don't like you to do that. So, but that is a stereotype. Although there is some really also good research in psychology, which shows that it's the masquerade effect. And the masquerade effect is that as people age, they know that they are old inside themselves, but they have to masquerade as a younger person to get through the culture, which is basically centered on youth. So it is kind of interesting, this whole, I've never seen this before, this whole prescriptive ageism. This is a whole new development that I think as well is worthy of taking a look at, and again telling us where we need to intervene. Okay, why does ageism matter? Ageism really matters, and it matters a heck of a lot. If we were talking about racial discrimination, if we were talking about ethnic discrimination, if we were talking about sexism, if we were talking about discriminating about GLBT people, you know what? We would be taking this very seriously. We're talking about older people, but we know from all the studies of all the other groups that people who are subject to prejudice and discrimination tend to adopt the dominant group's negative images of themselves. And there's tons of research on that. And such that, for example, with older people and their negative images leads them to social exclusion because they do not feel or look upon themselves as having something just like society does, something to give to society. They don't think they're well enough to participate. They don't think they can work. You know, there's a new study in Australia where one of the researchers said if older people went back to work in Australia, it would save the economy $66 billion. It's pretty amazing. So, but the point is that some of the worst perpetrators of ageism are older people themselves. And we frequently forget that. Ageism and mistreatment are also very interesting. This is where I've started thinking a little bit differently about elder mistreatment and abuse, because it seems to me, and we have no way of knowing, but it seems to me to be just as bad as it ever was. And there seems to be more and more of us committed to the field, working on the issues and yada, yada. Most people in the field of gerontology, geriatrics, do not consider themselves ageist. So they basically end up saying that most mistreatment didn't really happen. They dismissed it because who in their right mind would be ageist that works in the field of aging? So frequently, there are many reports where we see, and I mean, having gone through these thousands of health authority reports, report after report is dismissed, can't prove it, didn't really happen, because of course nobody's ageist. Most ageist people rationalize their treatment of older adults. You can see in some of the court cases, at least in Ontario, I dropped Mrs. Jones on her head from the Hoyer lift and killed her, but it was just a big mistake. The nursing home didn't keep the equipment up. It was the nursing home's fault, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Or, of course, at the individual level, you'll hear kids say, well, Dad's in the hospital. He has severe dementia, so we sold his house, all his possessions, and we'll be putting him in a nursing home, and it doesn't matter because he really doesn't know anyway. We do a lot of rationalizing around elder abuse. The other one that I just love, and I just today I was checking the websites for CTV News and CBC News. Most abuse and mistreatment is considered exceptional. It doesn't happen very often. Right this week, or into this week and last week, we have a video cam of a woman in her nursing home room where first you see the woman caretaker waving around a rag in her face covered with her feces. Number one. Then the next part of the video is you see one of the caretakers come in, making the bed, clean sheet, blows his nose on the sheet and puts it back. Okay? And this is all exceptional. This is all one video in one room. So next, you think this is pretty bad. Next, we have a male and a female PSWs come in the room and start making love right in front of her. That's not enough. This is exceptional, right? This never happens. Finally, the last scene is they're trying to change her clothing. They throw all the bedding on the floor. She's stark naked. The door is wide open, and everybody's looking in the door. That's not exceptional. I don't believe it for 1 minute. But that's what you will be told. When you look at the CTV film on poor Frank that I spoke about this morning, they interview the CEO that runs the nursing home, and her comment was, "Oh, this never happens. This is very rare. This is very exceptional." Wrong. So ageism, part of how this whole ageist idea gets wrapped up in this exceptional treatment of older people, which is not exceptional. The other thing that is a problem is that most older people are not worth the effort when we are actually faced with abuse. And I didn't realize how outspoken I had been this morning. But the problem is nobody speaks out. It's too much effort to report because you might get in trouble. It's like no good deed goes unpunished, right? If I report a student cheating, I will spend the next 6 months in committee meetings, etc., till I'm cross-eyed. So abuse is the same way. And oftentimes the reporter, they get mixed up with the messenger, and they blame the messenger for the report. One of the worst things, in my opinion, and I just made this up, but I see it every day. I work in the Faculty of Medicine. The science behind the mistreatment and the care of older adults is not worth the effort. And all of you can see that every day. The drugs we hand out are drugs that we know don't work for older people, but you know what? They're there, so let's just give them. Whoever reads a journal article anymore about what's new and what the new treatment is? Very few people. The geriatrician, probably, but we don't have enough of them in Canada. Nurses don't have enough time. PSWs don't read. So my whole argument is that views on abuse by professionals and by the community has ended up in a rather negative, vulnerable, fragile, poor older person, poor me type of perspective. And so that oftentimes, and last week I had a conference in wherever I live, Toronto, and I heard these comments. I heard these comments from people that I work with, and anyway, I was shocked. So, older people who are abused tend to be older women. Older people who are abused tend to be frail. They tend to be incapacitated and have disabilities. They tend to have dementia. They tend to live with adult children, or they're really socially isolated and live with 52 cats. They tend to be difficult and demanding, and they tend to be abused by overly stressed caregivers. We were just listening to, what were we listening to? Was it the UN? Yes, we were listening to a special conference by experts at the UN, the New York Institute of Medicine. That's what we were listening to. Had a special meeting of the special best experts, and there was a Canadian doctor sitting there assuring everybody that the major cause of elder abuse were caregivers who were overstressed and that we needed to look after these poor caregivers. And I thought, oh boy. Those factors are not correct. Shared living isn't just living with a child. Shared living is living also with a spouse, a friend, a neighbor, etc. The social isolation as a known risk factor is true, and poor social events, that is true. So there's one they got right. The presence of dementia is only been related to physical abuse. It has not been related to psychological abuse, and it has not been related to material abuse. Although people proclaim, everybody knows the highest rate of abuse in Canada is financial abuse. That's not true. We don't know that. In fact, in the last national survey in 1999, it was not true at all. What we do know as a known risk factor that people rarely talk about, but I'm sure you people know, is that mental illness of the perpetrator, specifically depression and anxiety, have been shown to be totally related to abusing older people. The hostility of the perpetrator has been shown to be related to the perpetrator. Alcohol misuse of the perpetrator. One of the first studies actually was out of BC on that very matter. But the most telling one is the perpetrator dependency on the mistreated older adult. In order to be dependent on an older adult, the older adult has to be in pretty good shape. They have to be running their own money. They have to be getting out and about. In other words, it's kind of backwards. Okay, what people will say, you know what? It's always women. Women are the most mistreated in this country. We don't have evidence to back that up. We have a little bit of evidence. We may get some evidence soon, but we don't know that for a fact. And in some ways, that's really unfair to older men who are also severely abused. There's a lot of chit-chat about the personality of the older person, that the older person shows higher levels of aggression through their particular coping skills. But we don't really know yet if this is a response to abuse or if it's a cause of abuse. We don't know that yet. Health is one of the favorite ones I hear in my faculty of medicine, except there's no research that genuinely finds a direct link between elder abuse and functional impairment, or even poor health. We don't have that link yet, but we keep repeating it back and forth to each other. Of course there'll be some people, but overall, we don't know that for sure. The fact of the older person being dependent has also not been found to be related to abuse. So that one of the things, and I've whined about this before, we spend a lot of time telling each other these facts, except they're not facts. I mean, I can hear Susan Ng get up on national TV and say, 10% of older Canadians are abused. And Fantani, or whatever his name was a minister of whatever, stands there and goes, absolutely right. And I'm going, we don't even know. But people keep sending this back and forth. And I start to ask myself, is this fair to the older person? If we did that about child welfare and child abuse, will we get away with it? I don't think so. I say that part of the speaking of child welfare, I feel that part of the problem that professionals face is they view the world basically through two models. And the first model is a child welfare model, and where it says children are incompetent, helpless, and vulnerable. Read, older people are incompetent, helpless, and vulnerable. Children are at the mercy of their caretakers. That's the stress model of the family. And society has a right, or is protectable interest, did I get that right? There's a lawyer, in their children. And the whole premise that the child welfare model operates on is the parents' patriae model, where we must protect those who cannot speak for themselves. And you can see a lot of that in the field of elder abuse. Of course, this model does not work because older people are not usually incompetent, nor are they helpless. Their rights as adults are not safeguarded under this particular model, and older adults are infantilized under this model. And I mean, all you have to do is spend 5 minutes in a hospital, a nursing home, even a clinic, and you can see the infantilization of older people. My secretary calls me honey. At big meetings, she'll say, honey, and I go, oh. You know, and it's infantilizing me, and I tell her that 100 times, but she's an American, and that's what, if there's an American, I'm sorry, that's what they do. But anyway, that's what she says. The family violence model is still very big. You can look in Ottawa and find the family violence model, and you will find elder abuse under the family violence model. The family violence model basically says that the spouse or partner is a perpetrator. It usually involves crisis intervention services. There is a strengthened role for the police where there can, depending on where you are, mandatory reporting. And there are often court orders for protection. Many times, women who are abused end up going to emergency shelters where they can stay 3 or 4 days for a week, or they can go to a secondary stage shelter where they can stay for a couple of months. The problem with this family model is, I mean, without ever what's said there, it keeps putting the spotlight and blaming the family on a rather consistent basis that is just not true. We all know abuse can be perpetrated by all kinds of people. Adult children, relatives, professional caregivers, professional and non-professional caregivers, home care, hospitals, etc., besides a spouse. And without going through all of this, crisis intervention, short-term intervention is not what older people require. Older people require long-term intervention, and we all know from Gloria's research that moving older people is not a great idea. So elder abuse is not always about vulnerable adults. It's not always about females. It's not specific to any social class or ethnic group. It's not necessarily caused by caregiver stress, the cycle of violence, and you can go right through the whole thing. So, but people tend to stick with these old views, and I'm not just sure why they do, but they do. What is of great interest to me is what older adults think. And I think everybody's heard about the shame and guilt, fear of reprisal. Fear of reprisal is huge. Fear of not being believed, fear of being institutionalized. In the old days, if you were even suspected of being abused, you got slapped into a nursing home right away. A lot of older people are truly frightened of the police and the court system. And in fact, I think it's in Florida, in Orlando, that they've actually developed a whole special court system and a courtroom, and everything, the whole environment's changed for older people when they go to court so that they're not so terrified. The most amazing thing for me is that most older people are not aware of their rights. They don't know what's available to them. and they actually don't realize they're being abused. Now, these are just words. We just interviewed 350 older people in all across Canada in a pilot test looking at elder abuse and trying to develop our questionnaire for a national prevalence study. And what we did is we recruited groups of people who had been abused and groups of people who hadn't been abused, and then we used our questionnaire to see how well it predicted what happened. What we discovered by accident was that what we did is we used some of the best measures out there, and they're not really great, but they're the only measures out there, such as the conflict tactics scale, which goes through, I got pushed, I got shoved, I got burnt, I got boiling water, and right down to I was threatened with a gun or a weapon. People would say, for example, yeah, my wrist was broken. They'd click off on the scale, broken bones. Then we started saying things to them like, well, did you think you were physically abused? Oh, no, I wasn't abused. Well, how did this happen? Well, my daughter's always in a hurry. She's got to get me dressed before she goes to work. And, my bones are really thin. And, she just snapped my wrist by mistake. Oh, it was terrible. Or one of the highest differences between what they rated on a scale and what they said was psychological. And they check off yelled, intimidated, screamed at me, so and so. Did you feel that you were being treated disrespectfully and abused? Oh, no. My son always yells at me. He always scared. He always says, I'm going to put you in a nursing home if you don't do blah, 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 blah. They didn't even know they were abused. And you can say, well, different culture, different this, different that. You know what? It's against the law to break somebody's bones. And it is outrageous that an older person has come to accept about themselves as being so unimportant, it doesn't matter how much we hurt them. And it also tells us how much we need to do education, not just for younger people, but for older people as well, as citizens of our country who should know. So we were stunned at this. And so now what we have come to understand, and there's like 19 community studies in the world of elder abuse, and there's something like 15 or 16 institutional abuse studies in the world. They've all used the same types of scales, but nobody's asked them, is this really abuse? And what we've come to realize is that we're underestimating the degree of abuse that is going on out there. Very seriously underestimating it using these scales. But more to the point for this talk is that I'm so shocked that older people find ways to rationalize for themselves why they're being treated badly by their own or their caregivers. Again, I'm picking up on this issue of capacity and substitute decision making because frequently there is a lot of trouble in this area where older people are not treated as participating members of our society. Most older people are more than capable of making their own decisions and should be asked directly about what's going on. Frequently we ask the neighbors, we ask the family, we ask the cleaning lady, we ask everybody but the older person. The older person is the key here. They're the person that can answer the question. The other thing that we're learning, all of us, I think, from the Alzheimer's research and the brain research that's just pouring out the door, it's quite amazing new research, that's what you should get next year, is that mild to moderate cognitive impairment people can still answer questions about being abused, neglected, or mistreated. But oh no, we don't do that. but we can. And we have seen through this new research that they're very capable of answering these questions. And just the last thing that I just want to mention is always, and quite frequently, I don't know how involved you've been, but you always hear about the best interest test, right? The best interest, what's in the best interest of the older person, right? That's what we're asked. What's in the best interest of the older person? What's in the best interest of the older person needs to be examined really carefully, because I know when I hear that, I start thinking, whose interest? Whose best interest? The family? The caregiver? The person down the street? Is it really about the old person? Who, as a human being and a decision maker, can make that decision? Substitute decision makers can sometimes be making decisions for themselves. I don't know if you've heard about institutional abuse, which is a wonderful example. There's lots of studies of this, where older people basically say, a wife or a husband says, no, I'm not taking so-and-so home. Nope, 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 not happening. Even though the person is more than ready to go home, can function at home, is, assess, blah, blah. They don't want them home. They had a bad marriage. They don't want them anymore. Here's a perfect place to leave them. And everybody feels sorry for them. They still have the money. They still have freedom. And the institution is left putting that person in a nursing home or assisted housing or somewhere. So the best interests of the older person aren't always met, and we don't think about treating them as an adult. So and you can help me with this. I mean, it just became so obvious to me, if we started treating older people as equal citizens in our society, that citizenship confers rights to participation, and it confers responsibilities. Oftentimes we demand very little of older people because they're incompetent. We think they can't blah, 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 blah. They can't. We don't do that. We are not treating our older people in Canada as part of our society. I do not think we are. And if we start doing that, if we start thinking about what if we started treating older adults as true citizens of our society, as equal to everybody else, you know what we would do? We'd be mainstreaming our services. We would be age-proofing our services. You know, if you need housing, there's an expert for older people at the housing registry. If you have an abuse problem, we have an expert about elder abuse here too, besides women abuse, besides child abuse. We need to think about that. We have segregated and separated older people out from the rest of society and said to them, you're not citizens. You're frail, vulnerable people, and we don't like it. Because you could see that in the beginning of where I started. Okay, where does this lead to? My favorite example, poor Frank. Frank Piccolo, you all know, was the man who was basically murdered in the nursing home. The only point I want to make about poor Frank is that the people who are living in nursing homes are not treated as citizens in a home. If I live in a condominium and the neighbor came and murdered me, the police would be involved. We wouldn't accept it. My family would be outraged, right? We wouldn't accept any of this. But why do we accept it? You know why we accept it? In terms of resident-to-resident abuse? It's normal. It's become normalized. And we know that from one of the studies that the older people themselves, that it's part of living in a nursing home. This is normal nursing home life, is to live in fear of your neighbor, to live in fear of being killed, harmed, hurt. That's normal. Family often think, and we talked about that this morning, family often think if they complain, the problems will just get worse for their family member. And I know people who don't complain. I know quite a few of them. They just refuse to complain because they're afraid to complain, because there will be repercussions. So they're silent. So again, the abuse becomes normalized. We don't say anything. Nobody has the guts to stand up because they're worried about the person they care about. The facility, of course, is never interested in reporting because they do not want to appear incompetent. I don't know about BC, but I can tell you in Ontario, many nursing homes hide their infractions. For example, I talked about the woman who was dropped on her head from the Hoyer lift. She was left there for 7 hours because nobody knew what to do and they didn't really want to report it and they didn't want anybody to find out. The government, of course, is definitely not interested in hearing anything about abuse because it means that all is not well. And perhaps there's a problem with their governance. I mean, when you have to interview our minister on her way into a posh restaurant and she tells you, oh no, everything's fine. No, it's not a problem. So what if, so-and-so was attacked and died? Well, they had dementia. You say, okay. The bottom line is we're not treating people as part of our society. We're not treating their housing like we treat our own housing. We're not treating anything about them like we treat the rest of us. If I move on, when can I quit? Did I just start? No. This is the really boring part, but it just infuriates me. Researchers and funders in government do not treat older people as important Canadian citizens. We certainly know about the incidence and prevalence of child abuse in this country. We also know about the incidence and prevalence of women abuse in this country. We certainly know, I can't spell, GLBT folks in this country. We certainly have a very tight grip on HIV/AIDS people in this country. We even have a national census study on homelessness, if you can believe. Do we have a national study on elder abuse? No. No, we don't. We do not have one. Oh, because we don't have enough money? Of course we have enough money. It's just we don't have the political will or the interest or think older people are valuable enough to put the kind of money in that we need to do the right kind of study. That's from the funders. The funders have spent the last 20 years handing out small amounts of money, 50,000 here, 20,000 there, and it goes from Atlantic Canada to British Columbia, so that it's all even and it's all fair. Has nothing to do with the quality of the research, what we need to know from the research so that we can deal with this problem. We don't do that. We just want to make sure it's all fair and square, and people who wouldn't know what a chi-square was can still do the research. Doesn't matter. If that was child welfare, that wouldn't happen. And I guarantee it. Because I've been working on a prevalence study. There's a national longitudinal prevalence study on children. So, worse than that, if we had a prevalence study, guess what it would tell us? It would tell us the magnitude of the abuse and neglect in Canada. We don't know the magnitude. If I hear one more person stand up and say, oh, we all know it's financial abuse, we do not know that. We do not know that. That is not known. We need to find that out. We do not know the distribution of the issue in Canada. I already said to you earlier, we don't know if it's male or female, just as an example. We don't know what the worst type of abuse is in Canada. We really don't. People, you pick up a journal article and the first sentence is, elder abuse is getting worse in Canada. And you go, no, we don't know that. We don't have a baseline. that we can match to know if it's worse. And then we have all kinds of different people saying there's different factors that are correlated with abuse and neglect. We don't know. We cannot predict abuse and neglect. That is for sure. None of the theories that we have available, and they're really old and they're really boring, have found very little support. So what I'm trying to say is that we don't seem to think older people are important enough to put our money there so they can really start to develop policies that matter, that will really help older people, help us help solve the problem. They're not an important part of our society. And this just tells you, if we had some numbers in hand, we could develop some evidence-based policy. And part of that evidence-based policy would put the older person front and center as an adult and a citizen in this country who takes some responsibility, some responsibility for abuse as well. I can go on about baseline data. You know, if we say in Canada 6% of older adults are abused, I say to you, so what? What does that mean? Got to compare it to Israel, where 12% of older people are abused? Maybe. Maybe we need to know where we stand on the world stage and how bad our problem really is. The thing that is also important is that all Canadians will benefit directly and indirectly from knowing the exact size of this problem, how bad this problem is, in the sense that we too will be old someday. All of us are educated about this, so we should be able to stand up on our own and say some things for ourselves. But we also know that we don't want to waste human capacity, our human resources on this issue. We don't want to waste our money on taxes, on issues that may be bogus. We don't know for sure. And I mean, it's an industry, I know, I mean, I'm part of the industry. Keep trying to get money, get money, get money. Some days we need to stop and think, what are we getting the money for? Anyway, I would like us to start honestly rethinking aging and viewing older people as part of the life course, as people who are strong and able to make decisions themselves, and who we already, like, why are we leaving it up to us? Like we say, I use the empowerment model. We're going to use the patient-centered model. It's all about us giving something and saying, okay, you can make your own decisions. We shouldn't have to do that. We don't need to do that. If people, as older adults or citizens, they already have that right to make the decision, and they don't need you to tell them. So I think we need to rethink aging. Now, you can do the rope. The rope measures positive and negative ageism. And you just go through here and figure out, I never do that, which is a 0. Compliment old people on how well they look despite their age. People do that to me all the time. I wish they'd quit. Anyway, compliment old people on how well they look despite their age. Do you do that? Never. That's a 0. If you do it once, you give it a 1. If you do it often, you give it a 2. And you go right through down to 10 and count up your score and put it over 20. Hidden in here are 6 positive ageist attitudes and 14 negative ageist attitudes. And so you do the same on the next and figure out on 20. And you can figure out if you're ageist. And I can tell you, this was developed by Erdman Palmore, who did the Palmore quiz on aging, and he has tested it on reliability, validity, blah, 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 the whole thing. So you might want to just give yourself a little check. I found out that I was really positively ageist, really appalling. There's the scoring, and I quit. I've done enough.
You did a great job for nearly speaking for the whole hour and 50
Did I do?
Well,
Wow.
I think we've got 5 minutes.
Oh, good. We're all
for
tired.
questions and answers. For, does anybody want to ask some questions?
I'm just curious, you referred to Israel, 12%. Have other countries done this research in terms of rates and what you're talking about so that there is even a process to model or adapt?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And our massive research team looked at every study that's been done in the world on prevalence. And if there was a lovely student here already today, but there is an article in the Canadian Journal on Aging on the glass is half full, elder abuse in Canada. And in that, I summarize every single study that has been done. The latest study having been, I can't even speak it. Anyway, the latest study having been done in New York last year. And just prior to that, a national prevalence study done in Ireland. And it's all there, whether they used a theory, what the percentages, what the unit of analysis, was it the older person, was it the family member, was it a blah, blah, blah. So we did that for the community, and Israel is in there. And we did it for the institution. And the institutional studies are very weak. There's very few of them. There's a few in Sweden. Oh, they can hear me. There's a few in Sweden. The best studies in the world have been actually done in Germany by Thomas Gergen, and he's done 2 random sample studies of institutional abuse, and they're excellent. And all of those are summarized as well. So they're all in there, and they're in a nice little tidy table and really easy to read. And I would point out to all of you, we've never done an institutional study in this country. Never. Interesting.
Could you come and ask your question at the microphone as we record?
Well, you could just yell.
I was wondering, the UN Convention on the Rights of People with Disabilities has this new right to a legal capacity. Do you think that's part of the sort of new approach to elder abuse, and especially
Well,
capacity?
you know, the whole field of disability has been way ahead, in my humble opinion, in terms of, you know, the disabled person is in charge. It's his life, it's his, her, her. There is, and maybe you could talk to it, Charmaine, is that there's been a human rights movement at the UN in a very similar vein that I'm not so knowledgeable about. Are you people more knowledge? You must know. Does anybody know? Yes. Anyway, and the International Network for the Prevention of Elder Abuse has been very active in this, where we're trying to do the very same thing that has been done in the disability movement. And so you're absolutely right. And somehow it's not sinking into our heads.
So do you think they're working on like a UN Convention for the Rights of the Elderly?
Yes, that's
okay.
exactly what's going on right now.
Okay.
We're behind, as I say, we're behind the disability movement, which has been far more effective than we have. We're only starting because of all these negative views we have of older people. So I think, from what I know, we're taking a leaf out of that book.
I see.
Yeah,
Okay.
and I think it's a great idea.
All right.
Well, thanks for all your help, guys.
Do we have any more questions?
Oh, Charmaine, you can ask me tomorrow.
I was wondering, do you, when you're talking about ageism against older people, have you thought about it in terms of some of the ageist imagery that we use? You know, just sort of everything from within the media, just sort of generally, to even the stuff that we put on our brochures and things along that line. One of the things that constantly amazes me in terms of the number of pictures where we see older people from the backside. It's always, and you may see a person taller or a standing position, an older person sitting, and it's always from the backside. Or you'll see only parts of the person, and you'll see hands. For example, wrinkly hands. Right. And so our images about age, we kind of compartmentalize people, or we take away their face. We make them invisible.
Or what we do, Charmaine, I mean, if you watch TV, is one, they can't get it up. Two, they're dancing around in Depends, right? And three, as you say, we hide only pieces of their body are there to be seen. I think the media, which is, I think, very powerful, is communicating a message that I think we should all be yelling about.
I think you were talking about Generation X and Generation Y. There's some nice work happening in parts of Canada, partly in BC and partly in Manitoba, looking actually with Generation Z. So the young ones, and really sort of fostering a better understanding of older adults and a non-ageist kind of approach, and seeing some strengthening some intergenerational relationships. And it's a long step towards working towards a less ageist society. Right. Eye to eye, and the letter I, number 2 in the I. Society is people who are doing some of the work here in schools in British Columbia, and again, similar kind of work being done in Manitoba, and they're specifically framing it as a long-term abuse prevention approach. Yeah, so it's interesting to see if it will bear fruit.
Is that part of the Elizabeth Podnick's one where they have spent considerable time educating children about elder abuse? And
they don't even use that language of abuse. No. It's actually more language about respecting each other. Yeah. And understanding each other, So, and I think that's a whole big question we have in the area. Do we advance the issues by framing everything as abuse, by calling all these different kinds of pieces abuse? And so sometimes if our goal is to make change, we don't necessarily have to use the abuse language in order to accomplish that.
No, I really agree with that, but I really feel like I'm talking to people here who know the deal. And I really think that people in the industry or the enterprise of aging really need to wake up. And so I don't know why I've taken this upon myself, but I feel very strongly about it, maybe because I'm getting old and I'm heading out the door. But I think it's really, really time. Like the young people, the positive stuff, I mean, obviously, fantastic. We need more and more and more of that, right? In fact, they're starting an intergenerational school in Toronto, which is absolutely fascinating. And the interesting part about the intergenerational part is the kids are working with older people who have dementia. What a neat arrangement. And nobody talks about abuse or any of that stuff. So I absolutely agree. But somehow I'm wondering in my mind that we have spent so much time in our professions talking nicely and kindly about everything while it's gotten away from us, some of the negativity and bad stuff that I think we need to stand up and go after.
Seniors as a group have quite strongly and for an extended period of time talked about the foundation of abuse and neglect as it's based on ageism, both in terms of the reasons why it happens, for the different types, but also in terms of the responses of people who with good intentions want to be able to help. So it's a voice that often gets lost, and I guess sort of the big issue is like how to move forward. How to move forward, yeah. Yeah, so that 10 years from now, we're not talking about the same
We're not
stuff
talking
still.
about the same thing, which we
Yeah.
talked about this 10 years earlier.
Yeah.
Like, if I'm being really honest, we talked about, I mean, I wrote a book in 1991 about elder abuse, and I'm still hearing the same stuff, and it worries me. But you're right. We need positive, absolutely, for
We
sure.
have time for one more question.
Can we have a drink?
Hi, Lynn. I have an ulterior motive for this question, so please
Okay,
excuse
Kelly.
me. But if we are to raise awareness in general society, and I'm not necessarily talking about healthcare providers, service providers, nor the youth, but if we're to be raising awareness in society and educating about ageism, what would you suggest would be the tone, the verbiage, the medium that we should be using to do that?
Well, I think we should be using every medium. And I think one of the most, where I would start if I had, well, in fact, that's exactly what I'm doing with the National Initiative for the Care of the Elderly. I believe my major target are older people themselves. And I think that they need to hear the message positively framed with lots of options about what you can do about it and what they actually can do about it themselves. Because I think older, like, we've excluded them from this whole process. Like, here we are, like, I've been in this business for 30 years. I'm finally old.
And that's
but I'm just feeling very strongly that the message has to be given to older people for them to spread the message themselves and for them to start to think of ways to deal with this, because it's their life and it's what's happened to them. So that's where I would start. Professionals, you know what? Why are we not educating more in our universities for nursing, for social work, for medicine? Go look at a curriculum. It's pathetic what's in there on aging.
Mm-hmm. Agree. What about the population in general, though? Ageist attitudes.
I think the media, the intergenerational arguments are beautiful. I think most people really warm to that. I think we need to use the media way more. We don't use it enough. I mean, you think of that little ad that the minister did on, peering through the blinds and ripping $1 out of somebody's wallet. That's actually, a lot of us sneered and laughed. That was pretty funny. But you know what? It had a huge impact. People became very aware. So I think we need the social media. We need Facebook, we need Twitter, we need LinkedIn. We need to educate professionals, and we need to educate older people.
And the tone would be one of that shock?
No. I'm shocking people who work in the field, because it's time to...
So what's the tone that we take
positive. You're a citizen, but part of that is you're also responsible. You see, we haven't held older people responsible. We've let them, we look after them. Maybe it's because I'm a social worker, right? I don't know. But, like, older people can step up to the plate. They've got something to say too. They need to own and take over part of this. And it needs, I would do it positively. I wouldn't do what I'm doing here.
For the general populace, not just the seniors, but the general populace.
Yeah. And intergenerational is what I really push, because I think people do care about that.
Okay. Thank you very much.
Enough. Drink. Yes.